The Sony ULT Wear and Skullcandy Crusher ANC2 are both battling for that number one position of the best bass heavy headphones. Here's the TLDR. The Sony ULT Wear is a better overall pair of headphones. They're more comfortable, the bass gets deeper, and the active noise cancellation is superior. The main advantage of the Crusher ANC2 is nothing matches it in sheer bass power. And with equalization, it's actually really fun to listen to. The mic is better and it's more sturdy. So this comes down to whether you want a better everyday pair of headphones or if you want thunderous bass above everything else. Super quick on the connectivity and controls, and then we can get to the sound, or just skip with timestamps. The Crusher ANC2 uses Bluetooth 5.2 and it has multi-point connectivity, meaning it can be connected to two devices at once. This uses the AAC codec. It can be used with a 3.5mm cable as well. This gets up to 60 hours of battery life with active noise cancellation off and 50 with it on. These should last me a week easy, but since there's no auto shut off, often I'll leave them on all night and maybe all day and night if I'm not even using these for a day, which will keep draining power. The Sony ULT Wear also uses Bluetooth 5.2 with multi-point connectivity, same deal. It only plays audio from one source at a time. This has AAC and LDAC. However, LDAC gets disabled if you're using multi-point. Now, if you can tell the difference between AAC and LDAC, this might be a big deal for you, but personally, I can't tell the difference. 3.5mm audio is available. This gets up to 30 hours of stated battery life with noise cancellation on and 50 with it off. I usually keep the ANC on, sometimes the transparency mode, which they call ambient, and these last almost a full week for me, but not quite. Now for the controls, the Crusher ANC2 has physical buttons. There's volume up, play and pause, volume down. You can hold the volume buttons to skip or reverse media tracks. The ANC switch for on, off, and stay aware. I'll go over the ANC after the headphone audio section. On the left, power button and infinite scroll Crusher bass slider. This makes little beeps to tell you how far you've slid up to like 50% or 100%, but it's easier to tell exactly how much you are on the app. The ULT Wear uses a combination of gesture controls and physical buttons. On the right ear cup, swipe right to skip, left to go back a track, up and down for the volume. Double tap to play and pause. The left ear cup is where the physical buttons are. This button controls the ANC between on, off, and ambient sound. You can actually make it only ambient or on, which is how I set it. There's also the Alt button, which affects the bass. I'll go over that shortly. All right, headphone audio quality. Now this section is going to be a little bit technical, but don't worry, I'm going to explain this in a way that anyone can understand. Now up front, I'll give you the quick summary. I prefer the Sony ULT Wear's driver tuning way more than the Crusher ANC2, and the sub bass gets satisfyingly deep. However, the Crusher ANC2 with enough EQ can get close to the ULT Wear, and nothing beats that Crusher bass. So while I do use the ULT Wear more, I still bring out the Crusher 2 on occasion. Both of these devices were made for bass heads. Saying these have too much bass is like going to a concert and complaining that there's too much music. That's the whole point. Both of these are using 40mm dynamic drivers. And when you turn all the effects off, Crusher bass, ULT, clear bass set it to 0. I'll talk about what all those do in a little bit, but everything's set to flat. The Sony ULT Wear sounds far better in pretty much every way. The Crusher ANC2 has very harsh and strong treble. Those are the high-pitched frequencies like glass breaking. They're not extra detailed, they're just loud. The mid-range is decently represented, but the bass and sub-bass, which is the very deep rumble, those are very weak. The result is that vocals sound very thin and shrill with no body. Instrumentals are tinny without any low end. So overall, not really a great experience. On the ULT Wear, the highs are still prominent and detailed, without sounding muffled. However, they're not as jarring. The mid-range is natural and clear. The bass is significantly elevated over the rest of the frequencies, which is how any bass-focused headphones should sound. Neither has a particularly wide soundstage, but they're closed back anyway. But you don't get these devices to use them with the bass turned down, so let's turn the bass up. The Crusher ANC2 has a slider called Crusher Bass. This utilizes haptics separate from the main drivers that vibrate to simulate powerful rumbling bass. The higher you go, the more bass you get until it's a full-on skull-shaking vibration. Not exaggerating, no effect on the market matches these. Unfortunately, gaming with these is kind of suspect because Bluetooth delay. But during games like Armored Core 6, some of the explosions and some of just the music with the rumble with this, it was just amazing. But if you're into gaming, I'm also currently testing the Skullcandy Player 720, which I think sounds even better than the Crusher ANC2. Amazing gaming headset. Talk about that in another video. And of course, for bass heavy music, that's what this is made for. However, the Crusher bass does have its flaws. Now, the ULT Wear bass controls are needlessly complicated. I think they tried to make it appear simple, but since you cannot control the bass frequencies at all in the standard equalizer, because the lowest it goes to is 400 hertz, it ultimately just makes it very difficult to understand exactly what ULT is doing and what clear bass is doing. Well, I found out. I measured the frequency response of both the Crusher ANC2 and Sony ULT Wear using my mini DSP ears, and this is the result. This is the frequency response with the ULT Wear, clear bass off, ULT is off. These are all labeled easily sub bass, bass mids, and then this is the treble up here where it says brilliance. Now, the clear bass slider in the app can raise or lower the volume of everything under 200 hertz. So this is with it at plus 10, and then this is minus 10. It keeps the overall shape of the curve, just raises or lowers it. There is also an ULT button. So let's say we put the clear bass at 0. If you turn on ULT 1, it gives you an increase to the bass and the sub bass, not as drastic as clear bass 10, but it still gives you that boost. You hear this little particle explosion sound effect when you're on ULT 1 and a more dramatic one on ULT 2. What's interesting is ULT 1 and ULT 2 are actually doing the exact same thing. If you look really closely, the red line is actually right under that green line because there's truly no difference in the sound between ULT 1 and ULT 2. However, when you cycle between them using the button, what happens is that ULT 2 will take whatever your clear bass setting is on ULT 1 and boost that up by 10. So if you're at -3, it'll bring you up to +7. If you're at 0, it'll bring it up to 10. And just to show, if you're at clear bass 10, they're going to look exactly the same. And this is the highest amount of bass that you're going to get with this, way higher than everything else on this graph, which is as it should be as a bass heavy device. All right, now let's put these two next to each other, the Crusher ANC2 and the Sony ULT Wear. This is out the box for the Crusher ANC2 with the Crusher off and the clear bass 0 ULT off on the ULT Wear, which is this blue line. Skullcandy gets misrepresented a lot for having very powerful bass and nothing else, no treble, no mids, but that's just not the case. And I got the receipts. It's got more treble than the ULT Wear. It's got more mid-range, not as much lower mids, which is interesting because this is actually where the ULT Wear starts to take over. The lower mids, the bass and the sub bass, that deep rumble here, and then that glass shattering effect up here. That's where the Crusher ANC2 is the strongest. Honestly, I just don't like the way that it sounds out the box. But again, this is the bass arena. So we'll put the Crusher straight up. Let's go to 60%. And then this is with ULT 1 on the ULT Wear. You'll see for the Crusher, I'll go back and forth between these, that right at around 200 hertz, it's pretty much doing the same type of effect where it's under 200 hertz where it's increasing. However, this is a much more narrow type of a boost. It's not boosting all of this sub bass and it's not getting all the way up to 200 hertz. I said this in another Crusher ANC2 video, but you really get this disjointed type of a sound when you turn on the Crusher bass. You get this tinny type of sound from the treble, and then you have some very prominent mid-range, but you're losing that lower mid. You don't have much of the bass from the 100 to 200 hertz, and then you just get this huge spike, this vibration. You just feel it in these. It's not quite like a controller rattling. It's definitely better than that, but you don't get that full bass, the full spectrum of it from 20 all the way to 250. You don't really get all that. You just get some of them. So it's not a warm and rich sound overall. You just have the tinny sound and then you got the vibration together. Whereas in the ULT Wear, it's a lot more evened out. Now let's max the Crusher bass out to 100. And I will say this graph does not truly do the Crusher bass justice because you can feel this way more than you can see this. This is a crazy looking hump in this graph, but it feels even more wild, just how much vibration it has. Clear bass 10, ULT 2, this is as bass as you're going to get on the ULT Wear. It's still a warmer, richer type of a sound. And that sub bass vibration, it's something that the Crusher ANC2 just, it can't compete with. It has the power, it has the boom, but when it comes to that 20 hertz to that 35 hertz, where you have the lowest of the low end rumbles, just that background boom and vibration, Crusher ANC2 just, the haptics don't really account for that area. And some of the higher bass elements, it doesn't account for that either. I wouldn't say there's one clear, easy, obvious winner, even though I do go for the ULT Wear much more. The ULT Wear has very effective noise cancellation. It doesn't eliminate background noise entirely, but it's good at dealing with fans, cars, and just general ambience while outside. The ambient sound mode plays back audio that the external mics capture, so you can have a heads up on your surroundings. There's the typical ANC white noise, but it's not very distracting, at least to me. And testing ANC on and off, it didn't change any of my frequency response measurements. Despite the name, the Crusher ANC2 has very weak noise cancellation. Similar white noise effect, but it doesn't really block out as much, not even basic PC fans. Outdoors, it's almost completely useless. Transparency mode makes external noises pretty high pitched, but that matches up with the way these drivers are tuned. Just like with the ULT Wear, ANC on or off did not affect my measurements or what I could actually hear.
The Crusher ANC2 has very good background noise cancellation when it comes to the microphone. The clarity is a lot better when I'm not in an environment like this. It's quite windy, cars going by over there, but it's doing good at cutting that sound out. And in comparison to the ULT Wear, well, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that right now. The ULT Wear has a very aggressive noise cancellation filter, but it does cut out my voice quite a lot and it sounds muffled overall. I think that Skullcandy was able to get that that fine line of cutting out the background noise but keeping the clarity of the voice, whereas I felt like the ULT Wear, they weren't quite able to get it with more than muffled range.
The Crusher ANC2 uses the Skull IQ app. It's great on paper, but in reality, it's extremely unresponsive and unreliable. It constantly resets your settings, button shortcuts, and erases the equalizer when the app is closed and reopened. It turns voice control on with that same annoying prompt every single time I open the app. And that's the best case scenario if it remembers that your headphones even exist and it doesn't make you repair them entirely. I've also never gotten the firmware update to ever actually fully apply to the Crusher ANC2. Sony's app, which is currently called Sound Connect, is just great overall. You get many different customizable EQ presets, unlike the Crusher ANC2, which gives you a few that you can't see what they're doing. This one, the ULT Wear, you get a bunch of different ones that you can edit. The Crusher ANC2, you get a few that you can't see what they're doing and then only one that you can edit. Now, I keep adaptive sound control off as it takes the control of the ANC out of your hands, so it randomly turns on and off even if you don't want it to. You can change some other basic settings in the app as well, and everything just works quickly, responsively, and consistently. The Sony ULT Wear is one of the most comfortable pair of headphones that I've ever used. The Crusher ANC2 feels more sturdy, but it is a pain in my neck, literally, after about an hour. The ULT Wear is made of very light and thin plastic with pleather ear cushions and just the right amount of padding inside. There's a sliver of metal in the frame. This makes it 256 grams, but I've been able to wear this for over 4 or 5 hours without too much problem. This comes with a catch. If you end up getting one of the older models, they develop cracks over time. Just the act of taking them on and off, folding and unfolding them, and lengthening and shortening the adjustable frame puts enough stress on the thin plastic to cause micro cracks until it eventually chips. Now, I've linked Sony's official repair service program. I've heard the newer batches don't have the same problem, but if your unit falls within these serial numbers like mine does, then this should give you peace of mind that at least Sony is aware of it and they have a program specifically for it. Now, the Crusher ANC2 is made of thicker plastic and it has a thicker strip of metal on the adjustable frame. The pleather ear pads have more padding, but they're somehow not as soft. The downside of the Crusher ANC2 is its 330 grams, which makes it almost 80 grams heavier than the Sony ULT Wear. Both devices have 90 degrees swivel inwards and about 15 degrees out. Aside from the creaky sound that you hear as I'm moving this around, putting it on, taking it off, the Crusher ANC2 is far more durable. The Crusher Evo is also very durable as well, and I've had that for almost 3 years now. No damage, but I will say, just like the Crusher Evo, this soft touch plastic, while it looks good, at least out the box, it gets a lot of smears and any sort of like dings are going to stay in it, like scratches even just from your fingernails that just kind of stay in there forever. So W in comfort for the ULT Wear, W in build quality for the Crusher ANC2. And now for my verdict. It's pretty simple. If you want the most powerful bass, get the Crusher ANC2. But if you want an overall better pair of headphones that still has a rich low end, then get the Sony ULT Wear.